Thank you very much. So this talk is called Towards Richer Computational Models of Concept Learning. And I'm going to start with just a quick plug for the NYU Center for Data Science. So it's a fairly new, large interdisciplinary initiative at NYU that sort of brings together computer scientists, political scientists, astronomers, neuroscientists, linguists, and everyone who's interested in using data and extracting knowledge from data. So if you're interested in coming to some events and talks at the Center for Data Science, you can add yourself to the mailing list. I'll have it up at the end of the talk as well if you want to copy it down. So I work in computational cognitive science, and I'm particularly interested in problems, computational problems that are easier for people than machines. So despite a lot of the exciting recent progress in AI, people are still usually quite a bit smarter than machines. And here are just some of the ways that people are smarter. They're better at object recognition, seeing, understanding, creativity, reasoning, active learning, language understanding, and the list could go on and on. I'm going to talk today about concept learning, which is a term psychologists use for sort of the mental representation for categories. And people are much better at learning new concepts than machine learning algorithms are. And one way that people are better is that they can often learn a new concept from just one or a handful of examples. So say this is your very first time seeing a segue. This might be the only image you need in order to sort of grasp the basics of the concept and be able to recognize other segues. And so this ability is often called one-shot learning. It's been of interest to psychologists and computer scientists for a long time. You might also think of it as small data. I usually don't like to use that term, but that's really what it is. People often don't need big data to learn a new concept. And the interesting thing is, even though you get very little experience, people learn very rich concepts, and they can do all sorts of things with the categories that they know. Like you can parse a segue, you can draw new examples of a segue. You could even think about combining a segue with a motorcycle and some other vehicles that you know to create this interesting segue, motorcycle, unicycle hybrid, or whatever that is. So it's quite amazing what we can do and how quickly we can learn it. So the motivating questions for this work and more broadly for me are sort of, can we better understand these computational abilities that people have? And can we also use that to help develop new data science or machine learning algorithms that learn in a more human-like way? So in order to do this, my collaborators and I were looking for a domain where we could sort of make some traction on this and study sort of human learning and machine learning on a relatively even footing. If you use full visual scenes, then you might unfairly bias the study towards people, because that's really easy for people and hard for machines. If you used a big spreadsheet of financial data, that would be too easy for machines and not easy for people. So we wanted something that sort of high-dimensional natural concepts that could be learned by both. And we also wanted a reasonable chance of being able to build a model that can see most of the structure in these objects that people can. So the test bed that we came up with was something called the Omniglot dataset, which we collected. And you can also think of this as kind of like a big data experiment in psychology, where we had many people on Amazon's Mechanical Turk drawing sort of handwritten characters from the world's alphabets. And this is just sort of a small fraction of the dataset. There's over 1,600 different characters, and there's only 20 examples each. So this is sort of the flip to how this character recognition is sort of thought of usually in machine learning and data science, where you just have a couple of characters and many thousands of examples each. So this is sort of the transpose of that. So I had the slide earlier of all the cool, interesting things you can do with the concepts that you learn. And it turns out even with characters, which are a lot simple, you can do a lot simpler, you can do all of the same things. So you could parse them, generate new ones, invent new characters, and maybe you can even learn them from one example. So we're going to try this right here. So here's some character from a foreign alphabet that hopefully you don't know. And in the grid below is another example, someone else drawing it. So I'm going to move my laser pointer quickly across the grid, and if you could just clap your hands if I touch another example of that character, that'd be great. Okay, is everyone ready? Right, so that was some excellent one-shot learning. I heard lots of right answers, and that's where it was. So you don't need a lot of examples to learn that. And again, I mentioned this data set. was very large and very rich, and we actually have a little movie of 20 people producing, all 1,600 characters and all these alphabets, and we use this to sort of inspire the model and fit the model that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. And a cool thing to realize is that even though these are new characters for people, they draw in very sort of stereotyped ways, where you can see that most people sort of see two parts and they draw the top part first and the other part second. And we sort of found this all over the place, that there's a lot of sort of commonality in the parts that people use when they're drawing these new things. And here's even a more complicated character, and you can see there's a lot of structure to the way that people did this. So we sort of took this quite literally and said, can we build a learning algorithm that looks at a new handwritten character that it's never seen before and induces something like a simple program that can capture it, and when you run the program multiple times, it can produce multiple examples of that character. So this is a model that we called Bayesian program learning, and it has sort of a set of primitives that in this case are sort of simple actions that you can use your hand to produce, but it could be more general, like image patches or geons or sounds or so on. And you stitch these primitives together to create parts, and you stitch the parts together with relations to sort of create object templates, or these simple programs that you can run multiple times to create different examples of the character. So this is the idea, and this model was fit to that big data set of people drawing characters. It's entirely probabilistic generative model, so you can sample new characters from the prior. And we use Bayes rules, so we have a prior on programs, and you have a likelihood that renders the programs into an image, and you can use Bayes rule to talk about the posterior on programs given the image. And I can tell you the ways that this model sort of is related to some of the state-of-the-art object recognition models, like deep learning models, where it has sort of hierarchy and invariance. But the ways that this makes this model different is it has some key additional ingredients, things like compositionality and so composing objects from primitives, and also causality, where it captures something about sort of the underlying causal process that was actually exists in the world that produces these examples of a concept. Okay, and at the end of the day, I won't explain this, but you sort of end up, for a single character, you end up with like a simple program that looks like this, which explains how to generate new examples of it. So this is probably not going to make a lot of sense. I'm just going to flash some of the parameters that go into the model. But these are all fit to that big data set of people drawing. These are sort of a library of actions that the model knows about, how certain actions transition to other actions and how likely those transitions are. It knows about where strokes tend to start, how many strokes there are, sort of global image transformations, relations, all these things. So it's a complicated model. It has a lot of parameters, but we made an attempt to try to fit as many as possible to actual data of people sort of producing new characters. And now I can talk about some of those tasks that I mentioned at the beginning. So I can actually try the model on these tasks. So we're going to look at this one first, which is generating new examples. And what we did is we asked people on Mechanical Turks, so here's some novel characters. Can you produce a new example of one of those characters? So we asked, I believe, 9 different people to do that for any given character. So 9 people looked at this and produced their own example of that character. And we asked the model to do exactly the same thing. It saw exactly the same image. And then we asked the model to produce 9 examples of the same character. So one of these grids is 9 people, and one of the grids is 9 samples from the model. So you can think of this, if you will, like a visual Turing test. Can you tell which examples were produced by the machine or people? So I'm going to ask you to try to guess which is the machine. And I'm going to ask A or B. So if you could just raise your hand when I ask. So who here thinks A is the machine? All right, who thinks B is the machine? All right, we got a few more for B for that one. I'm going to do all of them, but we can do this one too. So take a look. How many people think A is the machine? All right, and B? Okay, more B again. Maybe last one. Let's do this one over here. Okay, votes for A. Votes for B. All right. And maybe because I asking too quickly, so that's why people were picking B, but it's actually A in all those cases, I think. So it's pretty difficult to tell.
Wait, go back.
Yeah.
One more slide. Wow, really? That was A. Okay. Unbelievable.
So we can also look at this other task about generating new concepts, which is we gave people some characters from a foreign alphabet, and we asked them to try to produce new characters, a new character from the same alphabet that might belong to that alphabet. We only gave people 3 seconds to do this. If you give them longer, they draw really nice characters, and they're really complicated, and we can't really model that yet. So we set our goal at sort of 3 seconds of drawing. So that was the task. And we can play the same game here. So here is an alphabet of characters, and this task is a little bit more creative than the one that you saw before. And one of these grids was 4 people, and the other grid might have been 4 characters produced by the model. So do you have a guess for this one, which is the machine? So how many people think it's A and B? Okay, pretty even. Maybe we'll try this one too. How many people think it's A? B? All right, fewer hands. So I think that's my cue to stop. Okay, so it was A again in those 2 cases. And this is sort of an example showing the model could sort of capture a general style for an alphabet, and it produces different looking characters for different alphabets. There's a whole bunch of different tasks that we sort of compared humans and machines on. I'm just going to blaze through a little bit of data here. So this was the one-shot classification task, the demo that we all tried at the beginning. And so a model's error rate for one-shot classification is pretty similar to people, and it's better than some of state-of-the-art object recognition algorithms. In terms of generating new examples, so this identification level is sort of the percent of judges in a Turing test like you guys all did that were able to tell that got the right answer. So they were basically at chance in that task, and close to chance in that one. And there was another task where it was sort of generate new characters from the prior. That was also difficult. And we tried one where we actually watched the people draw it, and you could watch the model draw it because the model makes sort of a detailed dynamic predictions. And it wasn't perfect. You could sometimes tell which characters were produced by the model. So there was a little bit higher discrimination there. So I just want to end with sort of a few speculative thoughts about data science and cognitive science and what these 2 fields might be able to say to one another. So let's start with data science. So big data is obviously a very hot topic in data science. And if we think about, what are some principles of working with big data? I'm sure there's a lot of people have different principles, think of big data in different ways, but I'm just taking some from this book called Big Data. And basically what they were arguing is that, you should learn from as much data as possible. And when you're learning with a lot of data, then simple models often work well. That's all you need. And that you want to aim for prediction, not understanding. And this may work for a lot of people's applications. If you have a lot of data and you just want to predict, then that's a fine way to go. But sometimes you might want to do more than just predict. You might really want to build an algorithm that can look at data and understand. And if that's what you want, I think we have to look more to principles of human learning and realize that people don't necessarily need tremendous amounts of data to learn new things. They can often do it from just a few examples. People learn complicated sort of compositional models that can be used for a lot of different tasks. And finally, rather than aiming for prediction, people often aim for a rich causal understanding of the world.
In terms of generating new examples, did you compare this with maybe symbolic regression or genetic programming, since you already have a structured program that could be permuted?
Yeah, that would be interesting. Like genetic programming could just be like a different type of inference algorithm that you could sort of use in the same framework that we have here, right? It's sort of a full probabilistic model. We sort of had to come up with our own way of doing search. But you could imagine plugging in sort of a genetic algorithm to do it as well. We compared to things like sort of deep generative neural nets and so on, and lots of Bayesian versions of the model. So we sort of took out the compositionality aspect of it and took out various of all the parameters and showed which ones you need to succeed on the different tasks. So those are the comparisons that we did. And it turns out people can tell when you sort of hurt the model in particular ways. Yeah.
So when your program recognizes these characters,
and reproduce, does it need a training process, or this is done with first trial?
Yeah, so the character that it's when it's doing those tasks, it's never seen that character before, whether it's classification or generation. But it's crucial that it's seen a lot of other characters. So it's sort of a story of transfer learning. Like part of the reason why we all can learn so quickly, or learn like a segue so quickly, is because you know about all these other things that are similar to it, and you can sort of reconfigure your representations for those concepts in a new way to represent the new ones. So the model sort of critically relies on a large amount of experience from other characters from other alphabets when it's doing the one-shot learning, if that makes sense.
Sure, that's fair. Thank you.
Okay.
Does the data from the machines or the humans tend to be more diverse? Oh, the examples that get generated.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting question. For the actual model, since it was all fit to sort of the noise, the amount of noise that people have when they're actually drawing using our interface, I think it's pretty similar. But that's something that a lot of participants sort of mention. They have sort of theories about that, where they think, people are very noisy, and therefore if like one of the models looks a lot, if one of the grids looks noisier than the other, they might think that it was the human production. So in some of the lesion models that we've looked at, that's sort of an interesting thing that we came across, is that people don't have a totally blank slate when they're coming into a task like that, as they sort of have theories about how computers should operate, and that they're more sort of deterministic than people might be, for instance.
What comes to mind are the experiments where you detect which sequences were generated by a human rather than a computer, because the humans are trying to be random, or they're trying to estimate it.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I hope that's not what people were doing. So I want to thank my collaborators on this work, Josh Tenenbaum and Russ Solkutinov, and the funders, and also thank you.